For today's meditation, we are reading from 1 Samuel chapter 23, verses 1 to 14. Now they told David, "Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors." Therefore David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" And the Lord said to David, "Go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah." But David's men said to him, "Behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines?" Then David inquired of the Lord again, and the Lord answered him, "Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand." And David and his men went to Keilah and fought the Philistines and brought away their livestock and struck them with a great blow. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. When Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, had fled to David to Keilah, he had come down with an ephod in his hand. Now it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah. And Saul said, "God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars." And Saul summoned all the people to war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. David knew that Saul was plotting harm against him. And he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod here." Then David said, "O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, the God of Israel, please tell your servant." And the Lord said, "He will come down." Then David said, "Will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul?" And the Lord said, "They will surrender you." Then David and his men, who were about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the expedition. And David remained in the strongholds in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not give him into his hand. David was told, "Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors." In his natural vigor and zeal for the Lord, he would have gone ahead and fought the Philistines and driven them out of Keilah. However, his response here shows us the stark contrast between how David and Saul made important decisions in life. David inquired of the Lord before making a move. This brings to focus a crucial facet of his character. His will was completely surrendered to God. He was willing to take a yes or no, or a no from God. David received a green signal from the Lord to go and attack the Philistines. However, his men were fearful. Even in Judah, they went in fear of their life because of Saul, never knowing when they might be betrayed into his hands. How much more dangerous to fight the Philistines and thus let everyone know where they were. Here we see why David's men loved him. He took their fear into consideration. He did not dismiss or scorn them as cowards. Instead, he inquired again of the Lord to make sure that he was doing the right thing. The respect and compassion that David shows to his subordinates is a classic feature of a great leader. The Lord not only confirmed his direction but promised him, "Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand." Having received the Lord's counsel, David was no longer hesitant. This is the holy boldness of a man after God's own heart. It isn't enough to ask or know God's will. We must be committed to obey God's will, even when it is difficult. Such simple obedience makes it easy for God to direct us. Those who inquire of the Lord but do not obey him may never receive an answer from him. In Psalm 86, verse 11, David could truthfully pray. In verse 11, "Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name. While David was defending his people, unasked and unrewarded, Saul spent his time chasing down his so-called rival. He was so obsessed with killing David that he didn't have any time for the work God had called him to do. Never do we see him asking the Lord for directions for his pursuits. He was so out of touch with God. On hearing that David was at Keilah, he said confidently, God has delivered him into my hand. Little did he know that God himself had directed David to go to Keilah, where he was under the Lord's protection. David did not rely on human loyalty or gratitude. Knowing that Saul would soon hear of his presence there, he asked the Lord what he should do. God affirmed to him that Saul would pursue him there, and that the people of the town would surrender him into Saul's hand. But David did not grow disheartened or vengeful. He did not undo the good work he had done there. He slipped away with his men, leaving his vindication with God. Jonathan was with Saul, honoring him as both king and father. Yet his heart was with David, his friend. He came to meet him secretly at the risk of his life, just to encourage him and strengthen his hand in the Lord. He couldn't do much for him in the wilderness, but he did what he could. Jonathan is among the great heroes of the time, simple, loving, courageous, and loyal to the very end. He constantly saw things from God's vantage point. We see Saul again pursuing David in the wilderness of Ziph. The Ziphites went out of their way to inform Saul and promised to give David into his hands. Unprovoked enmity is detestable to the Lord. Saul thanks them by saying, "May you be blessed by the Lord." One cannot give a blessing when bereft of the Lord's blessing. Moreover, God's blessing does not rest upon the murder of the innocent, much less when he is the Lord's anointed. Betrayal and treachery are not the road to the Lord's favor. Saul did not know the Lord despite his religiosity. Again, we see the Lord fighting the case of David. As Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture them, news came to Saul of a Philistine raid, and he hurriedly departed to fight them. Therefore, that place was called the Rock of Escape. In Psalm 121, David says in verse 7 and 8, "The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in, from this time forth and forevermore." For those who walk with the Lord, no one can harm us till our work is done. It is important to have a heart which is ready to do the will of God at all times. David kept a good conscience before God at all times and walked by faith, and therefore he knew the will of God from day to day. Let us be eager to enter into his rest by striving to know his will and do it with all our hearts. God bless.